Well, good morning, everyone. How is everyone this fine morning? And I hope that we find everyone in good health who's attending this particular presentation. This presentation, as you can see, it was originally created by Sam Scarcella, who's now deceased. And we call this a Galveston County Master Gardener Legacy presentation. It's information that we've collected throughout the years that really works in this area, and we continue to adapt it and change it to meet our needs here. So in saying that, let's get started. This basically is as you know, the Growing Great Tomato program. This is number 3. The first program was about starting tomatoes from seed, which we did sometime in December. The second program dealt with planting. Now the plants were growing and you're getting ready to put them in the ground. So we have a second program that we did sometime, I think, in January. And now this is the third program. You've planted them, of course, probably a little later because of what occurred from the freeze this year. But again, what we're going to be dealing with is now they're in the ground, they're growing. Now we have what we call stress management. We have bugs, we have diseases, we have our own faults doing all kinds of things. So this program basically will try to cover what we do there. All 3 programs will be available to you if you want to relook at them at some point on YouTube with the Galveston County Master Gardeners YouTube channel. So if you don't get everything, or you're not sure what I've said, or you want to go back and look at something, you'll have the opportunity to do that. Okay. In part 3, at this stage of you growing great tomatoes in Galveston County, you should have your tomatoes planted, especially long-term varieties such as heirlooms. Because they are what we call long-term varieties, the heirlooms, generally you have to plant them very early here. Because if you remember in the earlier programs that most tomatoes will quit actually pollinating when the nighttime temperatures get to be around 75 degrees. There are some varieties that are heat varieties that can go a little bit longer, but even those are not totally successful here because now we get into the stink bug situations and other elements that affect it. So in saying that, now we should be at a point where you've got at least something in the ground. The plant should be staked and trimmed up. And I'll tell you this over and over, no leaves hitting the soil, because that's where the pathogens are picked up from. If the weather is still cold, the north windy days, and hopefully we've passed all that, but every now and then it's Texas, so we got to be prepared for it. And if you feel a frost is possible, you should still have your protection covers on, and they should, probably be in place. So anyway, if you think they're gone, and which I think right now, I'm being maybe a little bit aggressive on this, but my covers are off. So if you feel the danger of frost is gone, go ahead and remove the covers. But as a recap, a week after planting, I want to go over some of the things. After a week of planting, you're going to spray with the fungicide like Doconil or Serenade. Now, Serenade is now what we're kind of trying to push people. It's an organic fungicide that is recommended. And this should be applied per the manufacturer's instructions. The fungicide is to be applied weekly after watering and after a rain because they wash off very easily. And the reason we want to do this is that they're very close to the soil level. And consequently, when you're watering or the rain hits, they splash up some of the soil, which introduces the pathogens into the tomato plant. After the second week of planting, also start applying a foliar spray, such as Miracle-Gro. A lot of people feel that, well, there's no real effect of that, but personally, I find that it does help. I think if the plant isn't absorbing it, at least some is falling on the soil, and consequently, it's helping it to grow. Once you start seeing the flowers, we want you to side dress with around 4 tablespoons or 2 ounces of a balanced fertilizer like 15-5-10. And this is going to be applied, of course, when you see the first blossoms, because when the blossoms start showing up, then you want to be able to start applying what I call balanced fertilizer, primarily because pollination has occurred. So your tomato is beginning to, fruit is beginning to develop. So you need the extra fertilizer to kind of get it going, because tomatoes like a lot of water. They're water hogs and they like a lot of fertilizer. Okay. And this is going to be applied about every 2 weeks until the end of May. So, I mean, by the end of May, your plant should pretty well be full grown. You don't really need any more. You're getting to the heat portion of the summer, and consequently, we don't feel you need to be adding any more fertilizer to it. You've pretty well, what it's grown, it's grown. Anyway, when you're applying this side dressing, we actually kind of draw a circle around the plant, and we look for the drip line area where the leaves are, whether it's in a pot or whether it's on the soil. And I kind of like draw with my finger circle, and I sprinkle the 15-5-10 in that area. And what we're trying to do is to get the root structure to go out and get that fertilizer that you just introduced to the soil. And that basically gives you a better root structure, which then can support the plant and support the fruiting that does take place there. So this is where you are, you should be, like I said, they're in the ground, and you should be doing this at this point. So let's talk about what we're going to cover in part 3 program. We're going to identifying and protecting tomatoes against insects. We're identifying symptoms and protecting against tomato plant diseases. We're going to show you how to protect tomatoes from birds and pests. And we're going to show you about protecting tomato plants from environmental issues such as weather. We also want you to understand some of the human factors that can cause stress on tomato plants. And this program will be presented with basically in a method where the symptoms are presented, and then the control that's recommended by the master gardeners here in Galveston County. So what can stress your tomato plants? Insects. They're going about chewing and sucking your tomatoes and the plant. Diseases now hit. There's fungal, there's bacterial, there's viruses that can affect your plants. And of course, there's non-insect pests, animals such as birds and squirrels. And then you have the environment. You have cold, you have heat, you have wind, rain, and if you're early, hail. And then there's the one that probably causes more damage than anything, and that's humans. Plant care, chemical damage, growing errors. So before we get going, we're going to be using basically chemicals at some point. And we want to relate to you that the chemical approach that we have from A&M is basically going to be integrated pest management. And the approach will be, we'll try everything that we have available to us, and that chemicals will be the last thing that we will introduce to get us through the issues we have. Instead of just jumping out there right away and putting out a bunch of chemicals on something, we'd like for you to approach it with the minimal effect on the soil and the plant, and use that what's available to you to get your problem under control. Okay, so anybody remember about DDT? Well, like a lot of chemicals, it's no longer around. And this is one of the reasons you can see, people on the beach, mosquitoes, so they would have these big spraying trucks that took place. Well, the thing about a lot of the chemicals, they do affect the environment and they do infect people. So you have to understand how they react and what's happening there with this. So with the strategy of IPM, basically it's going to focus on the long-term suppression of pests. It's going to try to use a combination of control tactics to approach the problem. We're going to minimize pesticides' negative impact on people and the environment, and it's going to strive to be economical. So the ideal IPM program can be visualized as a pyramid, with the foundation consisting of mostly non-chemical controls. And if we follow good sanitation and horticulture practice, pesticides should make up the smallest part of your IPM control. So this is kind of what you're looking at when we say a pyramid. You know, at the bottom, you'll have the cultural and sanitation practice. You'll have physical and mechanical controls, biological controls, and then at the top is the last thing you use, which will be the pesticides. And this gives you an idea of what we're talking about. You know, cultural is keeping the weeds down, keeping, diseases away from it. You can use, right here, different insects to help control some of the bugs you might have. And then mechanical, you can use things like, mulch. Anyway, all these are non-chemical, but all these can, contribute to controlling some of the problems that may exist out there. And of course, the last resort is chemicals. There's tons on the market, and we'll try to kind of help you out as to what to use and do that. Pesticides will always be part of an IPM program. They're quick and effective and relatively easy to use. Of course, the drawbacks are that they're hazardous to the users often, and maybe not, and also hazardous to beneficial organisms. And they must be used as directed by the manufacturer. Typical guy approach, if a lot's good, well, it's got to be put more on and it's better. Well, that's not the way it works with certain chemicals. So what are pesticides? It's basically any substance or mixture of substance used for controlling, preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating pests. And like you said, you have a plethora of choices to use from, and we'll try to help you navigate some of this. Okay. What do the pesticides modes of action? They work usually on the nervous system, metabolic inhibitors. They use hormone mimics, physical poisons, repellents, and of course, sometimes they're used, they're developed as attractants. So the two most common groups of pesticides includes nervous system poisons and metabolic inhibitors. And when people refer to the toxicity of pesticides to humans, they are usually talking about compounds from these two groups that are being used very, very often. Okay, is that safe? Well, if you use the insecticides in the way it's designed to be used and follow the label direction, risk to you, your children, or your pets should be minimal. It's certainly less than smoking that pipe. The labeling on pesticides, always read and follow the label. Remember the importance of following the pesticide label. Keep in mind that the US EPA will register a product as a pesticide only if the manufacturer can show that it will pose no unreasonable adverse effects on people or the environment. If you use a product in a manner that is allowed by the label, that guarantee of reasonable safety is destroyed, okay? So if you don't use it the way the label is intended or says, you basically, they do not guarantee the reasonable safety of the product. Okay, let's talk about classifying insecticides by chemical class. There's organophosphates, there's carbamates, help me out with some of these words here, botanicals, pyrethroids, non-nicotinoids, and then of course there's a whole bunch of other ones with that. So bear with me on some of my pronunciations of this, some of these chemicals. The organophosphates, many were formerly common pesticides like Dursban, diazinon, orthene, which was acephate. Malathion is still available, but you need to be careful. But probably what I've just mentioned, many are disappearing from the market. Botanicals usually are insects that are derived from plants. They include some very common used insecticides because they're found in nature. They're often called organic. Some of those will be pyrethrin from the chrysanthemum, neem oils extracts from seeds, rotanin, which is the jacama vine plant. There's mint oils that can be used, citrus oils, clove oils, and there's other essential oils that sometimes you have to research to. There's a lot more that you can use, but I don't have space to put them all in here. This is the neem seed. where neem oil is derived from. So you can see it's what they look like, where they get neem oil from. Perithrins are very common and very effective, and it comes from the flower heads of the Perithrum chrysanthemum. It's a nature combination of six compounds. It's called perithrin 1 and 2, jasmolin 1 and 2, cercinerin 1 and 2, and that's what it's in that actual chrysanthemum head. More uses are being approved than any other insect, and it usually includes an added agent that to help it work with other synergists to keep insects from destroying it. Excuse me. The only thing about pyrethroids, synthetic chemicals have now been, of course, established for it. And the botanical chemistry is called pyrethroids. Broad spectrum replacements for durspan diazon is what pyrethroids are. Low in toxicity to birds and mammals, but it's very hazardous to fish in some settings. Pyrethroids, insecticides are replacing the organophosphates for many consumers' uses. Pyrethroids are not organic, but do tend to be lower in toxicity to humans and birds. Because insects are highly sensitive pyrethroids, they are usually formulated in very low concentrations, which means less pesticide is needed to do the job. On the downside, some people we're known to have gotten rashes from certain pyrethroids, and fish are very sensitive to pyrethroids. And you need to keep these sprays away from streams and fish ponds. The pyrethroids examples will be phenolvalerate. You'll see that's on the back end of each one of that. You look at the chemical, and it'll have a therin or 8, as we call it, like permethrin, bifenthrin, cyflutherin, allorytherin, samithrin. Anyway, so acetylfalvate. So, I mean, all of these, when you look at the actual chemical compound of these particular chemicals, these are all in the pyrethroid areas. Nicotinoids. It's a new class of systemic pesticides, metachlorids by Baylor. Dinotiforin is a spectricide one. It's effective against sucking insects, chewing and boring insects, thrips. It's relatively low in mammalian bird toxicity, but it seems to be very toxic to pollinators. So be very careful using these at certain times, especially. Organic versus synthetic is another area we like to talk about. Organic pesticides include products derived usually from natural sources. Synthetic pesticides are human produced. And is organic inherently safer or better? Well, no. Mother Nature makes some pretty toxic chemicals herself. Consider poison ivy or the cow parsnip, right? Cow parsnip produces a juice that when applied to human skin can cause severe burns, even blindness. And some botanical insecticides are more toxic than man-made pesticides we consider dangerous. So botanicals do have one advantage from environmental impact. They rarely persist very long in the environment. And when you get your handout, you can kind of see I've got some more information on this one. So all I'm trying to say, because people say, well, organic is safe. Well, you know, Mother Nature can do some pretty nasty things too. So be aware of that. Okay. And carcinogens, well, tobacco has 7, the leaf has 7 carcinogens. A strawberry has 7 carcinogens. An onion bulb has 6. Tea has 6. Carrots, the root has 6 chemicals in it. Cauliflower, 5. Grapefruit, 5. So, you know, everything has a certain amount of carcinogens in it. So be aware of that. You know, we put everything in a cubby hole, and it has to fit that area. But So be open, but also be cautious on how you use this stuff, okay? We tend to like to use low impact pesticides with minimal impact on people and on beneficial organism, including beneficial insects. So, you know, a lot of us have grandkids, be aware of that. We want to keep them safe, you know, and you see on the left, I have a nice little ladybug there. So these guys can do a heck of a lot to help protecting your plants. Low impact pesticides, soaps and oils. They kill small and soft-bodied insects and mites, contact insects with shorter residue. Safer soap can be used, sun spray, ultimate spray oils, vegetable oil, neem oils. Unfortunately, with a lot of these, because they're low impact, heavy rains or heavy watering can remove the pesticides. So, you know, you need to understand what you're dealing with and how it works. Low impact pesticides are also a microbe. Basically, we tend to put that BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. I don't think I said that one too damn good, but anyway, it consists of derived from microbes that, when ingested, that kills the little buggies. Okay, so it's best to use that, you know, when you got something that's chewing or biting, you know, your plants. So, but unfortunately, this one too, rain and watering can wash off the protection. So you have to know that once you water, then you apply this thing, or after rain, you have to go out and maybe spray them again. So also baits can be used, you know, a mixture of insecticide with some sort of food additive attractant to come and get them, you know. So sometimes that, you know, fire ant baits, cockroach baits, you know, those are the type of thing. Crickets can sometimes cause a lot of damage to your plants. You can use baits for that as well. Botanicals derived from plants, although some have active ingredients that can be toxic, but they're generally formulated as a low percentage active ingredient and degrade quickly in the environment. Pyrethrum, which you know, I recommend a lot for some of the, you'll see later on. And we're kind of going through all of the chemical and pesticides that we have available to us before we actually start recommending what you should use for a condition that goes. So that's why we're kind of going through this now. But also neem oil can be used as a low impact, and it's essential oils, and there's others. Let's see, other low toxic acidity pesticides that kill through physical stomach poison action. Example, silical aerogel. Diatomaceous earth works on a lot of insects. Boric acid, borate compounds, and sometimes sulfur will also work on a lot of this. Some of the insects we'll be dealing with. Insect causing tomato plant stress and death. So now we've talked about chemicals that, you know, that on a level we tried to show you some of the things that are available to you and a little bit about the chemicals. And that kind of, when we introduce a chemical for a particular issue, you can go back and see, if you want to, what that particular chemical consists of. And of course, do research whenever you do use chemicals. So now we're going to get into, all right, now we got all the insects that are going to start attacking our plants. So we'll start identifying, and then we'll try to tell you what they do and what we can do with them. It's called the hornworm. The tomato plant is usually stripped of leaves, and I will tell you, generally it's on the top. The caterpillar can reach 3 or 4 inches. The pupa spend the winter in the soil, and they can usually, when you dig them up, they're about 2 inches long. There's usually 2 species found in this area, the tomato hornworm and the tobacco hornworm. But here in Galveston County, the tobacco hornworm is the one that you'll find that's most common. And you'll find that when they are attacking your plant, it's usually from the top. And I can tell you, you probably won't have one. They're very hard to see, although they're big. You're probably going to have to look for them because, you know, there's different ways to attack it. The difference is, you can see the tomato hornworm has basically a V on its body, where the tobacco hornworm has more of what I call the backslash on it. So you can see, to identify them, what they are. They're big boys, and they do eat aggressively. Because this insect is a causes a chewing damage, BT is what we recommend to be used. But they're big, and sometimes for BT to work, they have to ingest. And about, it may take a few days to get them off. But I had an old master gardener tell me, his name was Luke Stribling. I said, how do I get these things off? What chemical do I use? And he always tell me, you can pick them off using the Taft method. I had no idea what the Taft method. I'd never heard of this chemical in my life. And I kept asking him, what is the Taft? And he said, no, Ira. He said, it's thumb and forefinger, So anyway, if you ladies don't want to do that, okay, we understand, but put gloves on. But anyway, you can also use the last resort pyrethroids. Can also be used to control hornworms if it's seriously infected. And you'll see in the picture, there's the stages, the moth. You can see what the pupa looks like, and of course what the insect looks like. Cutworms. Usually these guys arrive in the spring when the garden and fields are plowed and planted. The caterpillars basically overwinter in the soil. Oh, well, not the caterpillars, the pupa. But anyway, they're feeding on weeds and other elements. Usually if you have a large field next to you, you're probably going to have issues with cutworms. But these son of a guns will come up and they'll actually cut off the small plants at near the soil surface, particularly when the plants are young. And they'll do it during the night. So you come back and you see you've got about a 2-inch stub left, and it's basically tomato plant is gone. So what do we do about it? See, this is what they do. They can do tremendous damage in a very short period of time. They can be found by raking soil around the plant or turning over debris on the ground near the caterpillar. And usually adults are attracted to lights at night. So if you're planting your tomatoes where there's some kind of light nearby, you may have issues with those as well. So how do you control this? Well, firstly, we try to, when you're planting these things, try to control the exposed stem by cutting collars out of paper. You can see that's a paper towel rack, could use a toilet paper roll, but you need to cut the collars about 3 or 4 inches and just wrap it around there. So for some reason, they will not attack it. You can, some guys put toothpicks, sticks around it, whatever, to protect it. So I do have sometimes questions. What is that black circle around that tomato plant they're doing? We call this a watering ring. It's basically that when we water, we don't want the water going everywhere. We try to contain the water so that it does water deeply. So that's what that is. It was covered in one of the earlier programs. Vegetable leaf miners. The leaf miners are generally for vegetables. There are different other insects that can have leaf miners, but generally the one we deal with on tomatoes and vegetables, it's called the vegetable leaf miner. They tunnel, as you can see. You've probably seen this on a number of maybe plants through the lamina of the leaf, eating the chlorophyll cells as they go. They kind of leave them irregular shaped. Sometimes you can see the track of dead tissue. That's what you see when the white line on the leaf. High levels of damage on vegetable crops can cause stunted growth, and reduce yield. And high populations of the adult can be injured leaves by reducing egg laying and feeding scars called stipples, when you see that. So this is what they look like. There's just this very small fly. Often if there's not much damage, you can prune off the affected areas with newly formed leaves to stop the leaf miner infestation before it can become serious. And you monitor plants closely for the appearance of new mines. So, you basically, you can't really spray it, you're going to be trying to control it by taking, when you start seeing them, just pulling the leaf off, more or less. But this is, wait for the appearance of one of the mines on it. You can remove any infested leaves. We do find that the adult vegetable leaf miner are attracted to yellow cards. So you can use a coated card as well with a sticky layer, make it a yellow card. And also neem can be affected when if you keep spraying with neem, you won't find you'll have as much of that issue with the leaf miner. Okay. Beet armyworm. Now these guys are very small. They're bright green larvae with darker lateral stripes, but they're only about an inch long, very difficult to see. But these larvae do chew and they eat leaf blades, and in worst cases can defoliate a plant if they're very infested, okay? Again, this guy is a chewer and eating, and then we're going to try to use BT to control this pest. And again, if you've got serious heavy infestations, then you want to stop it immediately, and then the perithrins can be used. This is kind of what you're going to be looking at. If you look at the top picture, you see I have an arrow of that particular pinworm. That's how small they are. And then what they'll do, if you look at the bottom one, you'll see on the right-hand corner, there's a small hole with a green circle around it. That's where they've entered the particular cavity. They tunnel in. So it looks like tomato's not too bad. However, when you open it up, the inside will be terrible. You know, a good portion of it. But anyway. But populations may be controlled early during the first or second larval stages with BT. And then, you can see it's sort of it's a moth that actually lays the egg there. So, however, on the third and fourth stages, once they get into your plant, there's not much you can do about it. So, okay, they cause these mines that go in there. Okay, this one we have a big problem here in Galveston County. It's called the tomato fruit worm. Sometimes it's also called the cornworm. Different names, but the leaves show signs of caterpillars having chewed leaves. Newly hatched caterpillars are small, and they will eat its eggshell and then feed variously on, and actually quite a lot on tender leaves. They grow very quickly, and the older caterpillars feed on older leaves and quickly find and tunnel holes into your tomato fruit. And if you guys haven't seen this thing, you'll have a tomato with a hole in it. They go straight to that tomato and then go right through it. And these are, completely ruin your fruit. And so what are we going to do about it? So the fruit worm has to be done generally at the larva stage. When you start seeing your leaves being chewed up, you treat with BT in the afternoon or evening. If also you can treat with 7, it can also be used, but it must be used at least every 7 days, and rain can wash it off. Also avoid growing tomatoes near corn, because they're also called a cornworm. Corn is the most significant host for the tomato fruit worm. Encourage natural predators, big-eyed bugs, minute pirate bugs, lacewings, damsel bugs will also feed on tomato fruit worms. You can also you can plant dill, marigolds, parsley, and asters to attract parasitic wasps. Okay, now we go to the one that everybody wants to talk about, leaf-footed and stink bugs. The tomato fruit has white or light colored spots, if you haven't noticed. If you haven't, I know nobody has this problem, I'm sure, in this area, but just in case, if you look at your tomato, you'll have little spots on it that turn white. Quite often these spots are hard, even bitter tasting. So you'll see here we have quite a few. We have the leaf-footed bug all the way on the left. If you look at the bottom, we have the green stink bug, and we have the brown, I forget what it's the last name, but it's the brown stink bug as well. So these conditions become worse later in the season, just toward the end of the season, and sometimes, both coincide with the activity and feeding of the stink bugs and the leaf-footed bugs. These insects may be so few in number in the beginning of the season, they go unnoticed early, but as the numbers build up, the damage also worsens. And they can, particularly if you got pecan trees around, they generally will, build up their numbers that way, and then they'll migrate from the pecan trees to your plants. So be aware, they're all over the place. The insects is worse if tomatoes are near weeds and have not been adequately controlled, or near row crops where the insects might migrate from these large fields to your garden. They generally overwinter in these weed infested areas. So the falling leaves, they'll burrow into that, and that's how they protect themselves over the winter. So hopefully this freeze may have knocked some of this back, but we'll see, how this works. The damage, as you can see, if you're not aware of what the damage looks like, on the left, you'll see it's like little dots. That's what gets very tough. Can be bitter to the taste, and also not a very good tomato like that. You can see the leaf-footed bug on the right causing some of that, and the left is infested there. So it doesn't take them long to do that. And you can see on the right, the green stink bug can do just as much damage as the leaf-footed bug. Control. What are we going to do about these things? Well, you can do the Taft method. That's what some of our master gardeners do. You remove them with a glove and you drop them to a bucket of soapy water, and you can place the soapy tray beneath the plant and shake it. You kind of get them down, collect the bugs that way. Or you can use a vacuum cleaner, an old vacuum cleaner, to capture them, and you dump the vacuum contents in a soapy bucket of water or Ziploc bags. I did pretty good with this vacuum method for a while, and then for some reason, I think they became trained. As soon as I would turn them on, they'd all fly away. So I don't know. I mean, it does work, but until they decide, I guess they learn that the sound of the vacuum cleaner. I have no idea. But the best way to kill them is the nymphs. The young ones can also be killed very easy with neem oil. Another thing you can do, and a lot of master gardeners are trying, is the mechanical screen to cover for protection of your plants. You have to realize when you pull these covers back, you have the opportunity for these guys to fly in and get in there too. So, but it certainly should be less than what you find from them flying back and forth. Because usually when you walk up to it, you'll see them fly away sometimes. You can also try trap crops in an area around the garden, but you want to set it apart from the tomato plants. So for large plantings, a trap crop natural deterrents that draw stink bugs away from you. If you have a big garden, you can do a trap crop away from them and provide them with thriving habitat somewhere else. By planting abundant areas of small flowering plants near your tomatoes, you also encourage parasitic wasps, birds, and other predators that feed on the bugs. Whether they take enough out, I can't tell you that. Leaf-footed and stink bugs are known to be attracted to the color yellow. So be sure you don't plant your cages yellow. Sunflowers, marigolds, and chrysanthemums are good trap crops for these pests. Leaf bug eggs. You've probably seen this on your house somewhere. You see that nice little string of eggs. You've probably seen them on your screens if you have them as well. And the nymphs look like these assassin bugs. We always say, "Whoa, maybe they're assassin bugs." Well, they're not when you see a cluster like this. These are leaf-footed bug nymphs, and they're very easy to kill, but this is when you have to kill them. But you'll see on that particular picture, Mama's in the middle, taking care of them. We also had success with master gardeners using what we call a green treatment, which is kaolin clay, is sold as Surround WP. It's a soft white silicate clay mineral that is combined with water and then applied with the guard sprayer. After the application, the water evaporates, leaving a powdery film. It coats, acts as a physical barrier to insects, preventing pests from reaching tissue. You treat tomato plants for 2 weeks before taking more drastic measures to control the insects. Kaolin clay is natural and non-toxic. They don't like that, apparently, rubbing on their belly, and they fly off. It's basically the way it's supposed to work. One of my master gardeners has used it a lot, and he's very pleased with its reaction. So I introduced it here, so you're willing to try it. It does wash off. So again, you'll again be watching for how you water and if rains occur as well. Leaf-footed stink bugs, we're going to treat. If you're going to go with an insecticide, you may need to resort to insecticides like permethrin or permethrin, such as Bactericide bug stop, multi-purpose insect killer, or Bonide total pest control, concentrated outdoor formula, a cyflithrin, such as Bayer's Advanced Garden Lawn and multi insect killer, or an Venvalorate, such as Arthos bug begone, multi-purpose insect killer concentrate, or bonide bug beater concentrate. All of these are effective in controlling leaf-footed bug as well as stink bugs. Now, when I say controlling, you're going to have the bug there to be able to hit it. If they fly from somewhere else, and that's what happens. The new bugs find your plants in here, they come again. So I mean, you just have to be careful. And then when you start coating these things with these type chemicals, you'll have to be very observant as the days to harvest period from when you pull your tomatoes off. Okay. And be certain that you have to also wash the fruit before using it, okay? And above all, follow the product instructions. If it tells you you can't harvest for 7 days, then you need to understand that that's what you have to do. The cycle, we have more of a problem with the leaf-footed bug than I think the stink bugs, but I've had both. So, I mean, when they're prolific, they're prolific. And particularly when we've had mild winters, they really can be very bad and can end the season very quickly for you. Anyway, one of the things that we like to use, we like to encourage the assassin nymphs. They go after the young stink bugs and also the leaf-footed bugs. So you'll see a standalone one. Those guys are the ones that you're looking for. So, but anyway, that's the life cycle. And they are very prolific. You can see when you have nymphs, there'll be 20 or 30 at a time. Each plant could be infested with them, and they'll be all around your tomato plant generally, and tomato. Okay, so I mean, on that one, if you've got any questions, we'll try to help you out on that. But that's a tough one to deal with here in this area. White flies and aphids can also be a problem on tomato plants. The symptoms, as you can see what they look like, they're like a cluster of white little dots of our aphids. Both cause generally leaf yellowing and leave a characteristic sticky excrement called honeydew. And leaves appear shiny and are somewhat sticky when honeydew is present. And then from that, black mildew can also form from the honeydew. The control for that is the application of neem oil or insecticidal soap is quite effective for that as well. Here we go. Let's talk about diseases. All right, bacterial canker is characterized by wilting and eventual death of the lower leaves, with the leaves drying up while still remaining attached to the stem. It's a vascular tissue problem, and it becomes discolored. It's brownish yellow, and a characteristic yellow slime can be squeezed from the infected stems. The bacterium that causes this disorder is usually a seed or soil-borne problem. And you will find a lot of the bacteria and diseases comes from the soil. So, if you have this, then this is a problem, generally from a soil, but it can be from a seed. It's somewhere where you've got your seed from somebody who grew something or whatever. What does it look like? You can kind of see how the stem separates, and then when you cut it open, it's kind of black on the inside. It also affects the fruit. You can see there's like little cankers that'll grow on your tomato. And I've seen it in the right-hand corner. I don't know how well it's coming across, but there's little raised elements, the little canker stops on that thing. You can see also eventually what the tomato will look like. We recommend crop rotation and careful, of course, seed source selection from a reputable source, our primary consideration. And mechanical damage to the plant, such as topping, and it can be also spread the disease too. So there's also the next one would be bacterial speck. You can see the symptoms appear on any plant part. The leaves are infected of the plant are covered by small, dark brown, irregular patches of dead necrotic tissue that are surrounded by yellow halos. You can kind of see what it looks like. There's a little brown, dark brown center, and you see like a little yellow around it. The disease severity is increased by leaf wetness from a sprinkler, irrigation, rain, or heavy dews. And it also does affect the tomato. You can see the specks on them, you know, usually not too bad, but there's a way to control that. When it gets really bad, you can see what happens there. You try to minimize wetting of the leaves. Anytime you water, you really don't want to water the leaves. You want to, use drip irrigation if you can, or, water really low and of course early in the morning so that way it's time to dry off the leaves. Crop rotation is usually very necessary, and careful transplant selection are important. You spray with a bactericide every 10 to 14 days, and that bactericide is a copper hydroxide or copper sulfate spray. It does provide effective control. Then we have bacterial spot. Um, it's also a common one in this area. Dark brown water-soaked spots, larger than bacterial speck. They've actually, you can see the big spots. It's a little bit more difficult one to diagnose. Later, these spots become blackish, and eventually the effective tissue will drop out, leaving a hole in it. That's how I usually identify it. It's got holes in it. Black gray specks that later become scab-like spots appear on the fruit as well. And it tends to attack green tomatoes, not red. You can kind of see what it looks like. You want to plant high quality disease-free seeds, crop rotation. And again, we use copper hydroxide such as Cu Pro 5000 and copper sulfate sprays such as Bonide 811 copper 4E, and it also provides effective control. Again, you can kind of see the cankers or the spots on that thing coming up. And you can kind of, as you see, the three that we've kind of looked at generally are using the same chemicals to control it. Tobacco mosaic viruses. This is sometimes if you look at your tomato varieties, you'll see a T on in that list of disease resistance. So it's one of the most highly persistent tomato disease because it remains viable without a host for many years, and it's able to withstand high heat. The virus is spread primarily by mechanical methods and aphids. Gardeners can contaminate their hands when they touch tobacco products or infected plants and weeds and spread the virus to healthy plants. And aphids can easily transmit the virus from plant to plant. So what are you going to do about it? This is what it looks like, by the way. It's a weird looking tomato plant. It's not as, it's not as distinct as other viruses, but yellow-green molting on leaves, and leaves look more like a fern in the most characteristic symptom of the disease. And the virus-infected tomato plants are stunted, often with poorly developed and expanded and curled leaves. And open blooms may have brown streaks through them. So when you see a bloom, you'll see a brown streak in that. That's kind of the way I kind of look, but it does look like a weird plant. You can kind of see like to the right, it looks like somebody's dropped coffee on your plant. And you can also look like what the leaves look like. And then the actual flower, the blossom will have a brown streak in it as well. So anyway, this can, control of it is remove and destroy the infected plant. Keep your garden weed free. Always wash your hands thoroughly and disinfect the tools. Because, you want to carry it through with one of these plants. If you're a smoker, you need to be careful about this. And before handling plants, wash with soap and water, especially if you're a smoker. Best thing you can also do is plant a resistant cultivar variety of tomatoes with the letter T in it. You can see that this celebrity is if you look down at the third line, it tells you its disease resistance, and it has all of that, and you see VFF and T would be that it's disease resistant against the tobacco mosaic virus. Oh, another one that occurs is cucumber mosaic virus. Virus-infected tomato plants are stunted, often with poorly developed and expanded leaves. Plants are bushy in appearance, particularly if you've got a indeterminate. Uh, Leaves may be molted, and often have a shoestring appearance. Fruits are small and they also are misshapen. The control, aphids often are the virus vectors, so an attempt to control the aphids is the first step with insecticidal soap and neem, and eliminate weeds and remove infected plants from the garden as soon as they are seen. You can see how the plant looks. So anyway, next one is a very common disease called early blight. Symptom is an area in the plant that's caused by a fungus, and it's first observed in the plant as small brown lesions, mostly on the older foliage. Spots enlarged and concentric rings in a bullseye pattern can be seen in the center of the disease area, and tissue surrounding the spots may turn yellow. This is a very common disease here. If high temperature and humidity occur at this time, much of the foliage is killed, and fruit damage caused by early blight is the appearance of sunken, leathery, dark lesions near the stem scar. Fruit become infected when green. You kind of see what this one looks like. You see the big black things on the edges? The lesions on the stems are similar to those on leaves, and sometimes the girdle of the plant if they occur near the soil line. We call this collarot. On the fruits, lesions attain considerable size, usually involving nearly the entire fruit. But what you're looking for also is the concentric rings are also present on the fruit. Infected fruit frequently will start to drop as well. You can kind of see what that looks like. You see the spots all over the stem. You can see the spots on the leaves and so forth, and you can see some of the end results of the fruit of early blight. Okay. For the control, you can see how it just works up. It's a pathogen that comes from the soil, and basically, that's what you hear me over and over to tell you guys: keep the leaves and stems off the soil. So you want to use crop rotation. You want to eradicate any weeds that basically can bring up some of the disease. Space plants properly. You want good dry airflow. You can mulch your plants. Keep from when you're watering that the soil doesn't get onto your plants as well as when you water. You need to fertilize properly. You don't wet the tomato plant with irrigation water, especially at night, and keep the plants growing vigorously. Trim off and dispose of any affected lower branch. It'll start from the lower area and work its way up. You'll see all the damage from those leaves. You can basically trim them off and use mulching to act as a barrier. You can use a fungicide such as Doconal or Ceride, which is organic on severe cases. One of the things that I like to relay here, this is, why do we spray weekly with Serenade? One of the things we have when the plants are small, you see this plant here. If you've had one at the end of the seasons that started with a blight, I don't think you'll be able to get all those leaves that have been infected out. Consequently, they're in the soil, and that soil is now infected with this blight disease. So consequently, what you really need is basically to have some type of effective mean of using a fungicide on this thing. And for what I feel and what has been successful for us here is to spray on a weekly basis, trying to keep this, especially when they're small and close to the ground. And once they get growing, then we usually try to take at least 6 or 8 inches of the lower limbs off, because they're not producing anything, and you have plenty of foliage above to produce the fruit. So try to keep them, the limbs pretty clear from the soil level. So this will help out your early blight, which is very common here. Okay. The other one that's common is Septoria leaf spot. It's a disorder that's common also in this area, and it's more commonly known as a foliar or stem disorder. Leaf infection is notable first on older leaves with the appearance of irregular brown dead tissue lesions surrounding an area by yellow tissue. So it comes up pretty yellow with these black spots, brown spots, I mean. So you can kind of see what that one is. It's also one that's common, and it's also caused by, damp, rainy, cool weather. It causes it. It's become noticeable rapidly when increasing temperatures in the mid-season, and when heavy dews and overhead irrigation can contribute to the disease spread. So, this is kind of you can kind of see what it looks like. The whole branch turns yellow with spots on it. And then, again, this is after you can pull those off as well. So we'll talk about what we need to do to control this thing. All right. There's another photos of it. You can see how it just, if you leave it, it'll kill it. Remove the diseased leaves as early as possible. And if caught early, the lower infected leaves can be removed and burned or destroyed. At the end of the season, collect all the foliage from the infected plant and dispose of any or bury any. Do not compost diseased plants. We'd like to see you improve the air circulation around the plant. Space plants far enough apart. You don't want to crowd them because that, doesn't allow the air to remove the moisture from the leaves. So you want good airflow. And stake or cage plants to raise them off the ground to promote faster drying of the foliage. Mulch, you can mulch your plant. Mulching will reduce splashing the soil, which may contain fungal spores associated with debris in soil, and apply mulch after the soil has warmed. Do not use overhead watering. Overhead watering facilitates infection and spreads the disease. We'd like to see you to water early in the day if that's possible. And again, use crop rotation. Next year, do not plant tomatoes back in the same location where the diseased tomatoes grew. You can wait 1 to 2 years before replanting tomatoes in this area. But and again, if you can't, then there's different ways to control it. My crop rotation is that I tend to put tomatoes on, say, the left side of my garden, and then the next year I plant it on the right side of the garden. So I try to use that as my crop rotation, and I grow usually a legume in the other area that's available. Okay, you can use fungal sprays if the above measures don't control the disease. You may want to use these particular sprays. Fungicides will not cure infected leaves, but they will protect new leaves from becoming infected. You need to apply them at least once a week. I got here 7 to 10 days intervals throughout the season. And for this, you can apply macrolide, such as Bonide macrolide PT, which is copper-based. You can use a Bordeaux mixture, copper hydroxide, such as Copper Pro 5000 or copper sulfate, or Bonide 811 copper. So copper-based work better for this than anything, okay? And be sure to follow the harvest restrictions if they have any listed on the label. Okay, then we have gray leaf spot. This is Stemphylium ST. It's a pathogen that causes a gray leaf spot in tomatoes. Again, it's soil-borne. Gray leaf spot begins on round to oval dark specks on both sides of the leaves, with older leaves being affected first. Young lesions may have a yellow halo. As lesions age, they become gray, dry, and brittle, and they eventually fall away to create shot holding, as we call it in the leaf. Severe infections result in leaf drop. You can kind of see that there's kind of a gray circle, and then those will actually, the interior of that will just fall off, more or less. It's most commonly controlled with the use of a disease-resistant cultivars, especially in tomatoes. Resistance tomatoes are marked with the code ST. Fungus can survive for years, year to year on certain weeds, so weed control is important. You kind of see a close-up on the right what it looks like. You see how it's gray? Well, that will fall out. It's kind of a gray spot. I mean, it's fairly big. Leaf moisture from rains or dew increases its activity and disease severity. Again, you're going to use a copper-based fungicide for that one, like the mancozeb, Bonide mancozeb items such as that. Then there's late blight that also occurs later in the season. It's a very destructive fungus. Spores are airborne and can travel long distances. And lesions on leaves are large, are available. Usually you'll see them in water-soaked areas that eventually turn brown and papery. You can kind of see the bottom leaf, what happens in the center, little hole of water, and that's where the disease starts from there. Fruit lesions are large, irregular, green, brownish patches having a greasy, rough appearance, and green to black irregular lesions are also present on the stems. You can kind of see what this is, late blight, and you can kind of see what happens if you let it go on the right. She's dead. This is what the tomato, if you let it go, will happen. The fungus develops during periods of cool, wet weather, and the fungicide sprays such as doconil and ceramide during these periods may be needed as a preventative measure if the crop is being grown near large areas of tomato relatives, such as nightshade family plants, certain weeds, and potatoes. So that's why we tend to, if you're in your garden, you're growing potatoes, you might want to keep spraying with your Serenade or other fungicides. Okay, now let's talk about blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is a physiological disorder, not a disease on tomato fruit. The symptoms generally are a water-soaked spots on the blossom end, on the bottom of the tomato where the blossom basically drops off. You'll see there's a spot in the end of the fruit. And these spots enlarge and become black. And then a secondary infection by decay causing organism usually follows. So it can be pretty, basically your tomatoes toast. The cause of the disorder is a calcium deficiency in developing the tomato fruit. And blossom end rot increases with extreme fluctuations in moisture from watering methods, rain, or even droughts. What I have found generally, we tend to cause more of blossom end rot ourselves. We go away on vacation and then nobody's watering, and then you come back and you put a ton of water on it. And consequently, this irregular watering, the tomatoes like to be watered, I call it at the same interval, the same amount, at the same time. They like to have that. So if you have really a lot of water or a lot of rain, and then all of a sudden a big dry period and you don't water during that period, then this is what tends to start surfacing, okay? Other causes in other areas is insufficient soil calcium and excessive fertilizer, but it's not likely here in Galveston County. We don't really have a problem with soil calcium. Here it's going to be probably from the hot weather and droughts and irregular watering that occurs. All will increase the chances of blossom end rot, especially later in the season when it becomes hotter and it's more difficult to water. That's where sometimes the mulch does very well. It keeps the moisture down pretty well, the control well. You want to maintain a uniform level of moisture through irrigation and adequate soil mulches. Mulches will not keep the soil cooler, but also keeps it more moist. It will not only keep the soil cooler, but it will also keep it more moist. When you have this, remove the fruit because you're not going to eat it. You don't need to keep that on there, get it out of there. When you start seeing blossom end rot, throw it away, dispose of it properly. You can also use, if you start seeing this issue, you can use blossom end rot spray. You can, the best treatment is to react to that, because that means you've already started with you've had the watering issue take place, or you've had a lot of rains and then drought. But this can help you stop the damage temporarily. But it's just easier to try and water correctly. But Mother Nature can always throw you out of the park. So anyway, leaf mold. Symptoms appear as light green patches on upper surfaces of older leaves. Underneath the leaves in these areas, a purplish or olive green patch of mold growth is visible. Infected leaves turn yellow and drop off the plant. Fungus is usually spread by wind currents. High humidity and warm temperatures encourage mold growth. The problem is especially going to be severe if you're growing in greenhouses. You will need adequate ventilation and air movement to reduce the mold, the disease severity, by lowering moisture at the leaf level. This is another one also. You can use the copper-based fungicides such as the bonide mancozeb BT or the bonide 811 or the CU Pro 5000. Powdery mildew, the symptoms is fungal, is diseases that affects most of the plants. The infection is first noted as slightly chlorotic yellow spots on leaves and a white powdery appearance. Dust quickly covers the leaf surface, and affected leaves gradually turn brown and papery. The use of resistant varieties that can be also of your tomato plants are preventative fungicide sprays such as Doconal and Serenade are both important. Since the fungus also infects many weed species, good weed control and in and around production fields is important. And disease development is favored by cool, dry weather. There's also one that's, this disease here is it's beginning to occur. It's more toward the east of us now, but I want to bring it up. It's called southern blight. Usually occurs during hot weather. The fungus can cause dampening off of an older plant, a crown rot leading to wilt and plant death. Look for a mass of whitish fungal growth around the soil line on the stem. The disease appears to be less destructive on well-fertilized, vigorous growing plants. You need to keep debris clear of stem areas. Use good sanitation practices when trimming or cutting. In other words, clean your tools. Avoid over-irrigating, and special fungicides are now becoming available for what we call southern blight. Okay, it's called verticillium wilt. Under certain conditions of cool temperatures, moisture, and poor nutrition, yellow blotches on the lower leaves may be the first symptoms of the disease. Brown veins then appear, and finally, a chocolate brown dead spots occur. The spots may be confused with early blight, but they are not sharply defined and do not develop concentric bullseye rings. The leaves may wilt, die, and drop off. The disease symptoms progress up the stem and the plant becomes stunted. Only the top leaves stay green. Fruits will remain very small. They develop yellow shoulders and may sunburn because of loss of leaves. You can kind of see verticillium wilt. You can see when you cut the stem, you see the brown in the area, and you can see how the leaves are turned on it. This is a very serious root-borne disease. Infection takes place in the soil right when the fungus threads enter the root hair. It is aid in its entrance if rootlets are broken or nematodes have fed on the root system. The fungus grows rapidly on the sap conducting channels. Its activity there results in interference with the normal upward movement of water and nutrients, and the fungus produces a toxin that contributes to the wilting and spotting of the leaves. And if you're looking at varieties, you'll see the V reduction on it. Anyway, the diagnosis involves making a vertical slice of the main stem just above the soil line. You're looking for a brown color in the conducting tissues under the bark, and this discoloration can be traced upwards as well as downwards into the roots. And verticillium wilt discoloration seldom extends more than 10 to 12 inches above the soil, though its toxins may go further. Plant may wilt during the day as well. It's all right. Sometimes it's hard when nematodes are active. You have nematodes. Sometimes you have to kind of look at this, but you know, we say cut the stem. Well, the plant's probably going to be dead. So, you know, you're just trying to diagnose how bad the disease is. So control is going to be what we're going to do about it. It's going to be rotate the crops, use disease-free transplant, and growing only cultivars that are resistant to verticillium wilt. And it's indicated when you buy the seed by V or the plant following the tomato cultivar name. Bringing the soil pH to 6.5 to 7 and use a nitrate, nitrogen such as calcium nitrate will retard disease, and watch for disease spots and remove the plant when you think you've pretty well, you got a big problem here. And when removing diseased plants, also remove some of the soil around it and trash it. Do not compost it. So we want you to dig, because it's soil borne, we want you to dig around where the soil's all and remove that soil as well. There is no chemical control is available for this particular disease. So in other words, your plant is toast. It's a pretty bad one. Also in that category, we have Fusarium wilt. This is a warm, dry weather disease caused also by a fungus that is soil-borne and can be carried by wind and other methods. Infection occurs through wounds in roots growing through infested soil. Long distance spread is through seed and transplants. And the first indication of disease is in small plants is drooping and wilting of lower leaves with a loss of green color, followed by wilting and death of the whole plant. Often leaves on only one side of the stem turn golden yellow at first. So this one, you look at all, it's kind of weird. One side of the plant's going to wilt and turn yellow, but the other side's okay. As the disease progresses, the upper leaves of the plant will appear wilted, even when the soil around the roots is moist. You can kind of see what you're looking at here. I've tried to give you some pictures of that thing. It's when you have this one, it's toast. The stem of the wilted plant show no soft decay, but when cut lengthwise, the lower stem will have dark brown discoloration of the water conducting vessels. The diagnosis involves making again the vertical slice of the main stem just above the soil line and observing a brown color in the conducting tissues under the bark. This discoloration can be traced upwards as well as down into the roots. And this is where the difference from verticillum wilt occurs, is that the Fusarium wilt brown discoloration extends up the stem more than the 10 to 12 inches above the soil line. There are also various races of it. It's called Fusarium wilt 1, and that's how it's indicated with F, race 2, which is 2 Fs, and race 3, which is 3 Fs, when you're looking for your seed disease resistance. Control, you need to rotate the crops, use resistant-free transplants, and growing only cultivars that at least resist races 1, 2, and 3, indicated by F, FF, and of course the 3 Fs following the tomato cultivar name. Keep your pH at 6.5 to 7, and use a nitrate nitrogen, such as calcium nitrate, and it will retard disease development. Watch for disease spots and remove the plant as soon as you feel it's infected. And removing diseased plants also removes some of the soil. And like Fusarium wilt will also be one of those that there's no chemical control is available, so it's toast when you pull it. So you want to remove the soil as well as the plant when you have this one. Root knot nematode, it's awful, you'll be getting a handout that probably describes this much. In this particular picture, you can see the root structure, and you have all these little nodules on it. And if you really want to look a close-up picture of what they are, these little worm things on the left upper corner, that's what they look like. They're microscopic worms that live in the soil and in plant roots. They're generally the female ones. It's how they lay their eggs as well and reproduce. The affected plants are usually stunted, discolored, and they may die. And when you pull them, you'll see, we always check the roots at the end of the season to see if we're beginning to get any of these nodules or galls, as we call, develop on the roots, little knots more or less. You can see what they look like on the left. I think on the right, these are, can't tell whether they're affected or not. Anyway, but that's what the one on the left will give you a good indication of what they look like when you have root knot nematodes. When they're present, you need to use crop rotation, or you need to relocate the garden to a nematode-free area. You can establish a rotation system using French marigold cultivars to reduce it. they get into, they really like the French marigolds, and they get inside and then they can't get out. So when you remove those marigolds, you remove them as well. You can use also use elbowing rye planting during winter if you need to get rid of them then. Elbowing rye can be hard to get rid of because it produces such a big crop. You can't just easily take a tiller and do that. It would probably kill your tiller. What we tend to do is we cut it, with either, some kind of device to trim it down, and then we pull all the leaves out, and then we pull the plants, and we chip them through a chipper, and then put that back in because that's what we want. We want the actual plant byproduct to be in the soil. Okay. The other thing that really is effective during our what I call non-growing season in July and August is you can solarize during the hot months to dry out the infested area, and you have to use 2 sheets of clear plastic uh, for at least a few months on that. You'll see there's also a handout on nematode control, and that's a little discussed in detail of that. You can pull up any infested roots and remove surrounding dirt and discard in the trash. No, this is another one. The nematodes can be located very densely in that area, so you want to dig up the soil as well and get rid of that. Do not put that in any uh, composting area. You can use nematode resistant tomato, and I want to clarify that it's nematode resistant. It doesn't completely always, you may find a few nematode knots on there, but anyway, this is what we tend to use. Uh, there's quite a few that you can find that basically are nematode resistant. And I tell you, in this area, if you can find that, if you're growing tomatoes from seed, look for that. It's a really one that you want to use when you are growing it. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the more or less chemical. So we've talked about bugs, and we've talked about the bacterial insecticides we can use. We've talked about the different funguses. Now we have what I call more mechanical issues. We're protecting plants from birds and non-insect pests. Okay, protecting against birds, we tend to, try to use something like this. The ones on the left, it's Easter time. You may find a lot of plastic eggs. Sam used to use that. He'd glue these long stakes to them and put them out. And then on myself, I would use the old tennis balls that we don't use, put a screw in them and then hang them down there. And that seems to work to some degree. We tend to have to put them out, install them at least 2 to 3 weeks before the first tomatoes ripen. I will tell you that is, generally once the birds find your tomatoes, they come back almost every day. So you may have to resort to bird netting for protection. And if a drought is ongoing, they will attack tomatoes more for the liquid. Sometimes you can leave a water source, a pan of water nearby for them to go there instead of at your tomatoes. Other thing, rabbits, raccoons, you can see one of the things we sometimes do is you can build something very inexpensive, which is some 1x4s with some chicken wire on it. And we just lay them on, and we have poles, and you have access to them so you can get in and out. I mean, it's all types of mechanical methods that you can keep the rodents and also rabbits and any other guys that like to get in there. Then of course you got the squirrels. These guys are pretty darn smart. I mean, I'm still fighting those guys. I mean, they are something else to try to get there. This one, you can try set up a mechanical means here. You can see they're just tied at the top, and then I could drop a cloth over it to protect from them getting in, from the top. And I can actually set, I use Velcro tabs that can get in and out these pretty easily. But it keeps them from out there, from actually keeping if you have chickens or anything else in there, keep them out of there, birds, whatever it may happen. So you can use a mechanical means to do that. You can try chemical warfare with a predator urine. You can get a cat dog. Last resort, you can shoot them or you can move. but that's about all I can recommend to get rid of squirrels. All right, then let's talk about environmental issues affecting plants. You know, we call one thing that we get sometimes calls on, my tomatoes are splitting. Most tomatoes will split when they receive uneven amounts of water. Heavy rains, usually lasting a number of days, can cause this as well uh, as over and underwatering. You can kind of see splits on the top, splits on the side. Okay. You can't do much about the rain, but you can do the following during the growing season to help prevent splitting. You water deeply on a regular basis. That's why we recommend the watering rings. Try to give them the same amount of water at the same time, which will help your blossom end rot. Give them several inches of water a week. You can mulch the plants well when daytime temperatures reach the 90s at least, and keep the soil, helps the soil stay at the same temperature and prevents water loss during evaporation when it really gets starting to get warm. And when the season gets very hot, you may consider adding a little shade or some tomato varieties that are not able to handle our Texas intense heat. Okay. One of the things about tomato splittings I want to also inject here is that most tomato splitting occurs when the tomatoes are red. For some reason, tomatoes can't expand once they're red, but when they're green, they can. So you'll find that this tomato splitting will only occur primarily on the red tomatoes. So if you get a big rain, you know, coming up, or you see it, you might want to look at what you got out there that's red. And if you looked at the other program, you need to be pulling your tomatoes when there's just a section of starting to get pink. You don't need to wait till the thing is completely red out there, because A&M has found out the sugar content will be exactly the same when you pull them and you put them in a cool, shady area. Because remember, you know, your tomatoes don't need sun. You know, once they're picked, all you need is a shady, cool area, because you know the plant needs sun, not the tomato. So anyway, just sort of something to, you know, to help you with that you can lose your tomatoes for splitting. Once they split, you better use them quickly, because they'll go bad. The other thing that occurs, it gets is bizarre shaped fruit called cat facing. And what happens here, it's nothing to do with cats. I guess the word describes puckering or misshapen fruit. It can happen to tomatoes exposed to temperatures below 50 degrees when in bloom or setting fruit. So it's a pollination issue when the temperatures get low. Sometimes the cool weather interferes, and it can cause the blossom to stick to the developing fruit, which then keeps part of the fruit from developing. Meanwhile, the other part starts to develop, so you end up with all this weird looking and scarred fruit. So, and it's most common on large fruited types like heirloom tomatoes. Sun scald, it's long-term exposure of fruits to direct sunlight in hot, dry weather. We call it sun scald. This results in white or yellow patches on the side of the tomato that's exposed to sun. Usually, it's a result of you know, not enough leaf foliage over them and the sun getting to them. So, you know, sometimes you can protect them or whatever from sun scald with some type of covering if it gets too bad. But generally, you'll have a few that always have this. It will turn red from too much, you know, to sun, and tomatoes, you know, if you had too much sun, that particular area where it's sun scald, it turns white. And it'll be tough in that particular area. See, there's you know, those that have very leaf structure, if you take too much off, this is what happens. It's going to develop a paper thin area on the fruit that will turn white. It's caused by sun scald, where the area affected is exposed to intense sunlight and heat, resulting in a breakdown of the tissue. Limit pruning and keep foliage healthy to provide shade and protect from the ripening, the ripening fruit. Leaf roll, you know, I get this all, oh, my leaves are all rolled up and curly. Well, it's a physiologic distortion that may develop in cool, rainy weather, or heavy, depending on your watering or fertilizing. It causes the lower leaves to roll upward and become thick and leathery. And leaf roll does not affect plant growth or fruit production and requires no treatment. Wind damage, you'll see that, you know, when you have a lot of, particularly when they're young and you've got to put your plants out there and you get a lot of wind, if March winds, you'll see strong winds can easily damage the leaves. Try keeping them in a windbreak, especially in March and when they're first out there. Uh, yeah, high winds on or near sandy soils, if you're near the beach or near the lake or a particular area where it's sandy, can also result in sandblasting your plants, and they don't survive that very well. But you can see what happens with wind damage. The edges get all ripped up, and they'll come back with that. So anyway, um, also we have tomato rain check. Rain check is a formation of tiny transverse cracks on the fruit. These cracks heal generally, forming a rough texture on the fruit, but it doesn't really harm it. Cold, well, yes, you may know, we're aware from the previous, if you've had your tomatoes out there from the frost and you tried to protect them with a cover and heat, it didn't make it. Tomatoes do not like cold or frost damage. Any frost or freezing temperatures, they're toast. So doing any frost or freeze, they must be protected. And a cold soil temperature will also inhibit growth. Hail damage, this is a picture of what a few years back when we had hail came through here. I had my nice plants out there, and this is what happened to them. You know, they were nice. I was so proud of them. They were about 1.5 feet tall, and then bam. So how do you protect them? You can see that there's a little easy method that you can do there, depending on the size. Because usually you're going to have hail. Of course, this is Texas. You never know when you're going to have hail, but you know, usually it'll occur when you have more of the cooler weather or storm fronts coming through, the cold fronts coming through. So you can use something like this, just a 5-gallon bucket that you can just drop very quickly. If they're small enough at that point, you can protect them very easily. And of course, here we go, here we go with all those things that we cause to our tomato plants. Herbicides and pesticides can distort the foliage and fruit tomatoes. They're especially sensitive to 2,4-D. So, when you go out there and you're spraying other plants, sometimes you'll have carryover from either the herbicide or Roundup or whatever it be. So, then all of a sudden you see a few weeks later, your plant's starting to do funny things. The damage can bend the leaves. It causes cupping and thickening. The new leaves can be narrow and twisted, and they don't truly expand. The fruit may be cat-faced and fail to ripen. And exposure can occur when herbicides also applied to a lawn for weed control and the sprays drift. So when you're doing your lawns and you're right near your garden, you got to be careful with that. And this is kind of what happens, herbicide and pesticide, the clippings from grass or hay, especially a lot of hay has herbicides in it today. So you have to be careful that when you put hay, if you want to put hay around your plants instead of mulch, they could have herbicides. So you better know where it comes from. You need to be careful. If the exposure is minimal, the plant usually can outgrow it when it's smaller, but you'll have to water well. And here, what you'll see on the right, this picture is glyphosate damage. That's Roundup, and you can see how it starts from the near the stem, and it works its way to the white coming back. So it can either be a herbicide or like Roundup, some herbicide causing that. So you start seeing that, this is a good indication that you've got something going on in that thing. So and you need to be careful. Sometimes this can be caused from you weeded and some of your tools has herbicides on it from maybe something you sprayed or controlled with, and you bring it in there, and when you're trimming your plant, you'll bring that herbicide element into the area. So whenever you start seeing herbicide, just water very well. One mistake I did years ago, we're master gardeners, but we do make a lot of mistakes, and we do trial and error. But I have nice bottles of spray of my herbicides and stuff, and I was weed be gone type thing, and grabbed the wrong bottle and sprayed all my tomato plants with weed be gone. So when I put it down, I went, oh no. So what did I do? I just went back and just watered and watered and watered. And out of my dozen plants, I probably lost two. So, I mean, you have to kind of react to it and you learn by your mistakes. And, now, you probably have a hard time finding weed be gone in my house. But anyway, just giving you some indication there. There's also a plethora of issues caused by humans. Variety and transplant selection is wrong for our area. We're kind of finding that a lot of the stuff that comes from Russia or Poland, all those short day varieties, they don't seem to handle the area of our soils and bugs very well. Timing, this is always the issue. You're planting too late. I mean, I have someone looking for heirlooms, and here it is at the end of March. It's 90 days. When you're into an heirloom plant that takes 90 days before you get your tomato, I guarantee you'll be hitting that 75 degree nighttime temperature way before you get a lot of tomatoes. So you got to plant heirlooms very, very early. You'll have to nurse them along through the cold season. So anyway. Bed preparation, for some reason, people come down here and add a bunch of lime. Yeah, here, and particularly in the soil we have here, it's high in clay, and our pHs are very high. You do not add lime to anything here. Planting techniques, planting tomatoes in the same place year after year. You don't harden off your plants. Spacing is too close. Your method of planting, how you put them in, you just kind of plop them down, you don't prop them up. Watering and mulching, infrequent watering and loving it to death is what I call, too much water, no mulch. Fertilizing, wrong fertilizer, too strong an application, timing when you fertilize. Then there's, soil maintenance, tilling when it's too wet, you can ruin the soil. You don't do soil analysis, so you're adding the wrong things at the wrong time. Incorrect use of pesticides and herbicides. Weeding, using herbicides when there's too much wind or application too close to plants. And plants competing for nutrients with weeds and weeds transmitting diseases. Root damage, boy, you get out there with your troll and you're digging too deep and you start tearing up your root system and introducing diseases to the roots. So with that, the results of this particular third program, we feel that this is what you should be looking at. We hope that this is what we will see at the end of the season. And we hope that the three programs that we have put together here will assist you in growing magnificent tomatoes by informing you of the best horticultural practice for our area. Bon appetit.